Yeah, which is really interesting. Like I was listening to or watching the Kanye Zane Lowe interview, the first one he did this morning, because I like to kick off my morning with Little Joseph Kanye. Because I like to start the day running through a brick wall and thinking I can do anything. So I popped into that interview, and he was talking about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and how, like, he's like, I know how to make perfect. I did that with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And basically that whole narrative he has where, like, I made this album for other people and not myself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like you mentioned all those albums, like those feel like such Kanye albums. Like he really did make those for himself. So it's really interesting to think of this as kind of like a jumping off point. Like he had to get this out of his system. And on top of that, like thinking about some of the songs in this album and how he considered this, like making it for other people, like thinking about songs like Hell of a Life or Blame Game, like these really experimental songs that like very well could have fit on something like Jesus, you know, like it was almost like it went beyond just like making a radio hit. Like he was making these like legendary pieces of art, like things he knew critics would love. It's just so interesting to think about him in that kind of headspace compared to Donda. Like he's so far removed from that.
Oh, the stylistic difference is huge, especially we think of this, and at the time when this album came out, everybody was talking about like the maximalism, right? There's so much thrown into the production on each of these songs. It's and crazy. The song lengths are longer relative to like a lot of other albums, and they're so complicated, the songs just kind of unravel. They don't really repeat, which is really cool to me. So you don't really, in listening to this album, you don't really get a sense of like loops that kind of lead one to the next. You almost just get an unfolding of content as each chapter in each song kind of progresses along.
Yeah.
And I love the sense that it brings, but that maximalism really was in conversation as well with 808s and Heartbreak, which had been so, at the time people said minimal, but seems kind of funny considering like how full 808s feels in comparison to where Ye got with Ye and Kids See Ghost and Jesus is King and Donda. I mean, the whole period of 808s, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and Yeezus, people were talking about the minimal, the maximal, the minimal of Yeezus. And in hindsight, those albums feel like very...
Yeah. They have the full sound, like you're saying. Like, it's not like, even when there's empty space, like, there's a lot happening. It's an album that really attacks your senses and never really lets you put your guard down, you know?
Yeah, just the sense of atmosphere that you get. Like, Runaways, I think, a pretty open song on this album in terms of just, like, space and being a little more stripped down than some of the other songs. And it still feels very much like a full meal compared to a lot of the Donda.
It's a 9-course meal.
Yeah. A meal a minute, a course a minute.
Yeah. I love that, though. I love that about, while I really do like the minimalist places that Kanye has gone, and we've talked about it ad nauseum on all of our episodes, like the energy he's bringing to songs with that mentality and the different kind of atmosphere that brings and how it speaks to just his general, the reattachment to God and everything, and him becoming more open and more internalized. But I still do love maximalist Ye. Like I love, like you're saying, even though Jesus is technically minimalist, like it's a complete assault. And I love that aspect of Kanye. Like I think he was describing, because him and Zane Lowe were talking about On Site and how like it shifts from like this abrasive electronic music to that interlude, then back to it. And Kanye's like, that's life. Like you could just be in a car crash all of a sudden and that's how life works. Like that is kind of his mentality at these albums. Like it's just like throwing everything at the wall, like making everything happen and making it all sound amazing. It's such an accomplishment.
Yeah, and I don't know if we'll ever get this era again, which is fascinating to think about because this felt at the time, I think, kind of like peak Ye. or maybe the new direction he was going to go, which is why everybody was so fascinated by what Yeezus was going to sound like, and then so upset by what Yeezus did sound like. But we had 4 albums leading up to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and at this point we've had Life of Pablo, Yay, Jesus is King, like removing the joint albums, and Donda. So 4 albums past My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Wait, no, 5 albums past My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So it's weird to think about, because when we started the show, it was just The Life of Pablo. So you have My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Yeezus, and The Life of Pablo. So My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy still felt fresh and new, and like it was having a pretty big influence on the sound that Ye had. And at this point, it feels so distant, which is kind of
weird,
shocking to me.
Yeah, like, I mean, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in particular, because again, he paints it as an album he didn't even make for himself, something he kind of made for the world, something for us to stare at in awe and, you know, erect a statue version of it in a museum. Like, it's just something you take in and go like, how did someone do this? It's crazy. I think that shift away from that kind of sound reflects, again, Kanye's mentality. Like, he's so far removed from that. Like, the kind of sound he's chasing out isn't that. So yeah, it's hard to imagine him doing that again. I really wonder like what state he would have to get to make an album like that. Maybe becoming president will do it.
Right. We see what's fascinating too. You kind of see how antithetical it kind of is to his whole aesthetic. You saw photos of his house that he had in Hidden Hills with Kim, and the architecture that they had for that place that was just so spacious, so stripped down and kind of purified. And he's been in love with James Turrell, and James Turrell's like openness and space and lights. The more that we've learned about Ye, the more that My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy just seems kind of anathema to the way in which he is kind of, I guess, idealizing things, or his ideal state of mind.